Oh. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon, and I hope you're having a very Merry Christmas. Whilst I'm recording this, it is actually in September, so today we're going to be talking about the one-off Christmas special and one-off spin-off series of K9 and Company, starring Elizabeth Slaton as Sarah Jane Smith and John Leeson as K9. It was written by Terence Dudley, who also directed, if you remember, he directed McEdam, and it is actually directed by John Black. Now, what I believe is his first Doctor Who thing he's done, but there you go. This was a one-off special, which was aired on Christmas. And it was supposed to kick off a new series, a new spin-off series, starring K9 and his many friends. But it didn't work out like that. A lot of people say that the reason it didn't pan out to a series is because it just wasn't received very well. However, that wasn't true, as back in the times, it actually had some pretty strong ratings, despite there being a blackout in, I believe it was Birmingham. I could be wrong. It had a blackout somewhere, and because of it, it had slightly lower views than it was predicted. But even with having a lower prediction, it did do very well. The reason why we didn't get a series to it is because the heads of the BBC were actually switching around. Like, somebody was leaving and somebody was coming in, and they just didn't like the idea of the K9 spin-off, so that was why it was cancelled. And yeah, it's a very strange thing to hear that a classic, a spin-off series set during the classic era of the show. Now, a lot of you might be thinking why I put it here in the Chronicles of Doctor Who, why I've put it in during the East Space trilogy, especially how, when it comes to the Doctor's involvement, he passes K9 to Sarah Jane, and he can't do that whilst he's in East Space. The way I worked it out in my head is that K9, the Doctor gave Sarah K9 before entering East Space, and he explained explained in the story that Sarah Jane has had this parcel for a while. So whilst the Doctor's in East Space is when this adventure takes place, and which is why the Doctor doesn't appear in this one. Yes, there's a short story somewhere in a Doctor Who annual that explains that the Doctor made this K9 when he was travelling with Adric after East Space. But to put it long story short, I'm not considering that annual canon. I just prefer it having it here, and also it just makes it a nice time-in, as this is Christmas. This is my Christmas special, and K9 and Company actually aired on Christmas Day, making it the first true Christmas special, where the first Doctor did have a story that was that aired on Christmas and was had a much more lighter tone, but it was overall part of a larger story, and only really at the end of that story there was Christmas. Here, though Christmas is mentioned a lot, they say that Christmas is coming up. The story doesn't have much to do with the season, so this isn't really a Christmas special. Again, it's a story that just so happens to be set on Christmas Day. But anyway, so the story starts off with, we actually get introduced to Sarah Jane Smith's aunt. Yes, this is actually the first time we see a family relative of a companion. Wait a minute, I tell a lie. Victoria's the first one because we met her father. I tell a lie, completely ignore that. Anyway, so she's talking to her friend about how there are witchcrafts going on. People who believe in the black magic, and they believe that worshipping a deity as reasons why the crops grow. And then, out of nowhere, she seems to have disappeared as when Sarah Jane comes into the story. Sarah Jane is trying to look for her aunt, but she's not around, and she gets her own kind of a companion in the boy. I can't remember his name. Me and my friends joked that his name is Adric Mark II. He's basically Adric for Romana. He has a very similar character traits and a very similar acting style, in that the act is just not that particularly great. But yeah, so what most people remember about this story is its intro. It is, I believe the music was by Ian Levine, who is a very big but controversial personality in the Doctor Who fandom. I can't remember if I've talked about him before, but anyway, he made the music, and he originally wanted it to be an orchestra piece, but Peter Howell, the composer of the 80s Doctor Who theme, he actually made it a synthesized theme, and had John Leeson say K9 a few times so that K9 could technically sing his theme song. And yeah, it's really, really cheesy, and it really ages poorly. But that's not the funniest thing about this intro, in my opinion. My favourite thing about this intro is it's so cheesy and goofy and just feels like a really terrible 80s intro. Really like over the top silly, and you got the Sarah Jane just constantly just looking, drinking, and it just keeps shooting back. It reminds me a lot of the intro to A Touch of Cloth, where you can clearly tell they didn't have a lot of footage for it, so they just repeated the ones they had. But anyway, what I really like about this intro is that it's so cheesy, goofy, and cartoonish. And literally, right after the intro ends, we get almost a cultist ceremony with people in black hoods and people with goats masks on, almost doing like a sacrifice kind of thing, and just the contrast between these two elements, the juxtaposition is so mental that I just can't help but laugh every time I see it. But it's like really cheesy K9. Oh look, it's a detective lady and a talking robot dog, and then it goes to sacrificing and goats and demon worshipping, and it's just really bizarre. But yeah, anyway, so the majority of the story has Sarah Jane Smith worrying about where her aunt is, and when she's in the house, she finds this box that was left for Sarah Jane for when she comes back, because she's been abroad, but now she's back in England, and she's seen the box, and she gets introduced to her aunt's ward, who then becomes her companion, and they open the casket and they meet K9. Specifically, this is K9 Mark III. He is, because we've had 3 K9s, one of them went with Leela on Gallifrey, one is at the moment with the Doctor, Romana and Adric, and now this third one is given to Sarah Jane. Now this is a very important part in Doctor Who canon, because you have to consider this story now canon, because this is where Sarah Jane meets K9, a plot element which will actually continue on with K9's small cameo in The Five Doctors, in which K9 Mark III is shown to be Sarah Jane's pet. And it'll continue on again in School Reunion, and later on in the successful spin-off series The Sarah Jane Adventures, which we will be tackling. So that's really cool. So yeah, and a bit of backstory in terms of the production of this. It was actually a an idea was actually going behind the scenes whether the series was going to be picked up by John Nathan Turner, that it was going to be revealed that the Doctor didn't give Sarah Jane K9. This particular version of K9 was actually created by the Master, who would have used it to try and trick Sarah Jane into helping his evil purposes instead. This didn't actually come to pass, and it was later revealed in School Reunion that it was the Doctor, though not saying like when this happened in his timeline, but it was the Doctor who gave Sarah K9. So that's really a very interesting fact. I don't know if I like the idea of a Master created K9. The idea of Sarah Jane having a computer that was actually working for the bad guys will actually play out in the Sarah Jane Adventures, however, which we will get onto when we get there. But that is, I'm getting ahead of myself. So, why is this story considered so bad by the fandom? Because it has a lot of issues. The main ones, which I think really hindered this story in terms of enjoyment, is the writing on Sarah Jane and K9. Don't get me wrong, Terence Dugsley is a fantastic writer, but I prefer him more as a director than a writer, but that's beside the point. But here you can really feel that something was rushed, and the story has a very hard time trying to justify these characters' existence. Sarah Jane spends literally most of the story worrying where her aunt is and this mysterious plot of disappearances, because later on her companion character goes missing, and she believes this other boy kidnaps him, and he later then goes missing. But in terms of what she can bring to the table, I feel like with this kind of plot and how she's reacting, any other companion could have easily performed this role. I mean, it's nothing that really helps you stand out with Sarah Jane, which is a shame because Sarah Jane is one of the best companions in the series. Ask anyone and they'll tell you the same thing. Elizabeth Sladen gives a fantastic performance, and she hasn't lost a bit of it. Despite her story not being particularly interesting, here's just a personal character and a personality still shines out and through, and I think she really does help the story forward in terms of just pure Elizabeth Sladen. But in terms of how Sarah Jane is integrated into the plot, she could have been anyone else. Now, the bigger problem I have with this story is the title character of K9 himself. Despite this show being named after him, this episode really doesn't show why he's a very important character. The majority of the story is just him answering questions, and his role, again, could be played by any other character. In fact, there's only real two things that he does important to the plot. One of them is knock out somebody who was trying to burgle Sarah Jane's house. And like any other character can do that. And another part is when he hides underneath the stairs to find information about this guy that she suspects for the disappearances. But she ends up in the house and she comes back as soon after this scene takes place. So she could have easily just bugged it, put it on a tape recorder in that scene, and you would have gotten the same results. And it just shows how hindrance K9 is to the plot, that really he doesn't bring anything to the table, which I think why this story is a lot more hated than it could have been. It could have been a pretty decent story. I don't think you're going to get anything great out of this plot. The majority of it is just literally just characters talking. Sarah Jane tries to work out what's happening to her aunt, but she always gets caught up in talks about just general going on in the plot in the village, and it just really doesn't help at all in terms of what's going on in the plot. And a majority of the story feels like padding till scenes that we want to watch. A great example in this is during the final moments when they discover that the young boy is going to be sacrificed. Sarah Jane and K9 go searching through different churches, and I believe there was like 6 of them, and she goes looking at 3 of them, and then she gives out a small little detail about cultists, and K9 is like, there's only one church that has these requirements. It is this one, and then they go to that one and they save the boy before he could be sacrificed. And K9 knocks everyone out, which is really, really cool. Just seeing K9 funding a bunch of Satanists really is the glory of this story. A big issue a lot of people have, which I personally don't have an issue with, it's particular its tone. The story doesn't know whether it wants to be really heavy towards children. I mean, it's set on Christmas. You've got K9 as a prominent character. You've got Sarah Jane being a very sweet character and looking after the young boy. It's got a lot of dynamics with the family, with Sarah's aunt. And then you've got this plot about Satanism. And the story ends with a kid almost being sacrificed for crops. That's a pretty dark plot, but I don't think it really hindrances on the story. I like it it's juxtaposed to these elements. It makes the nicer moments feel much more nicer, and the much more darker moments a lot more darker. But the story itself doesn't help a lot, because a lot of the plot is just padding, and it's terribly written, terribly directed as well. There's a lot of scenes in which, despite there's supposed to be a time factor, like Sarah Jane mentioning like the sacrifices is going to happen like tonight, or they're in a rush or something, scenes just keep flashing between daylight and black as night, and it's really nauseating, because we don't really get a feel of time in this story. It feels like something's off in terms of directing, and I think the main factor is the daylight nighttime aspect, because scenes just constantly shift between daylight and nighttime, and it's really strange. But that could be part of just the rushed production of it all. But it is an issue, and I'm not going to really hinder it on John Black. I'll talk about more when he talks about Doctor Who, because I really feel like this story had big issues that would hinder the directing on it. But in terms of how the story looks, it's not particularly great. Lots of scenes that are set on sets look really generic, really bland. They're shot really basic, and like I said with the outshot, it's day and night, blah 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 blah. But some of the action scenes just really don't work. Like there's a scene in which K9 is chasing one of the Satanists. That's just a really strange term to say. But anyway, when K9 chases the Satanists, the directing is just way too slow. The cutting is just not, doesn't lead to any interesting moments. There's this fun little gag in which K9 mistakes a gnome for a possible threat. But really, it's really just bland and forgettable and boring. So yeah, K9 and Company, A Girl's Best Friend, which was the name of the first episode. However, fans just generally consider it K9 and Company because it was the only episode that aired. But yeah, overall, just a terrible start to a series if it started. I would have actually really have liked to seen it continue. I think, given this premise, with two of the most popular Doctor Who companions of the classic era getting their own show, I think we could have really had something special here. But I feel like, I could be wrong, maybe there's somewhere out there that confirms or denies what I'm saying, but the production feels really rushed. The story seems extremely basic and not allowing any of our main characters to feel like individuals or feel like their characters' traits stand out. The directing is really generically bland and boring and just sometimes plain bad. Like, there's no justifying it. Some of the directing in this is just plain awful. And the worst thing about it is that the story's kind of boring. But we got a really catchy intro, so that makes it up for it, I guess. So yeah, join me next time where we go back to E-Space. We say goodbye to two of our companions, and there's weird going-ons with tiger people and knights from the distant past. So join me next time for Warrior's Gate. And I'll see you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon, and have a merry, merry Christmas. See you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-ra.